For every 1,000 hacking at the leaves of evil, there is one striking at the root. Now, this quote from a poet and philosopher is a catchy way of saying that us humans have a tendency to want to deal with the symptoms of a problem and not the roots, the cause of a problem. And I think there's nowhere where this is more true in our current world than in the area of fear and of anxiety. The search engine Google tells us something interesting. It says that since 2004, searches for anxiety or anxiety medication or anti-anxiety really have skyrocketed. We live in a world where people are simply fearful and anxious. And all of this, of course, was before the coronavirus pandemic. Right now, where I am in Central Europe, at the time that I'm recording this, we are in a difficult, unknown situation. The world is in lockdown, and there's all the more reason, even more than before, for people to be anxious. And that's the bad news. The good news starts when we ask the question and we say, okay, what can we do about our anxiety? We have to deal with it, right? Long term, this is no way to live. It drains the fun out of life, and it's not very healthy psychologically or physically to always be fearful in the long run. Well, there are three possible things that you can do that I was reading about these last 2 weeks about how different people deal with their anxiety. And the first comes from a journalist who was writing and being very, very vulnerable in a well-known American magazine. And he was saying that for many years in his life, he's been suffering with acute anxiety. And then he listed 2 or 3 paragraphs of things that he has tried to help him. Right? Every kind of psychological therapy, most kinds of philosophy such as Stoicism. And he's also tried many kinds of different medications. And he admits towards the end of the article that nothing has really helped him. Secondly, you can follow the advice of many experts. I was reading about one expert who has written many books on grief and on dealing with anxiety. And his advice to most people is essentially to use tools such as meditation or mindfulness to try and live in the present. All right? So not always think about the future and worry about the future. Live in the present and forget about the future. And if that does not work, to try again until it works. The third option is a much simpler solution. This comes from a supermodel, and she was also being very vulnerable and admitting that when she has to perform in front of people, she's incredibly anxious. And so what she does is, before her performances, is she simply screams into a pillow, and that's the way that she is able to deal with her anxiety. So I read this and I thought, here we are, especially in the West, for many decades now, we've been pushing God out of the picture, right? We've been saying we don't really care if God exists or not. He cannot really help us. He's not a part of our lives. And now we're left with almost no tools to properly deal with anxiety. Our best advice to people is meditate, try again, and if that doesn't work, scream into a pillow. I wonder if we're not hacking at the branches, at the leaves. And I wonder if someone is not standing with an axe at the root of this problem who can truly, truly help us. Jesus of Nazareth, in the most famous sermon in the world, in Matthew 6 in the New Testament, he's speaking to a group of people who themselves were very prone to anxiety. And then he tells them a story about birds and about flowers. He says, look at the birds. They're so nice. They don't work, they don't toil, but they don't worry. And he says, look at the flowers. They always look nice. They don't work, they don't toil, but they also don't worry. And Jesus says, like these, you yourself should not worry. Why? Because you have a Father in heaven that cares for you. Now you might say, well, that's a very nice story, but my life is a little bit more complicated than the life of a bird or a flower. And that's true, but you yourself, like me, were also at one stage a child. And children, especially if they're blessed with parents, with a mom or a dad, they know what it's like not to always worry, right? 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds don't run around thinking, oh, who's going to pay the bills and who's going to take care of me? They don't. Why? Because mom's there, dad's there. They are going to take care of these stuff. And Jesus, with this story, says to us that we should be like little children, that we should realize we have a Father in heaven who not only cares for 5 or 6-year-olds, but for 50-year-olds and for 60-year-olds, and for 70-year-olds. And that makes a tremendous difference in your life when you realize there is a Father who cares for me. This Father, if I have not been with him or not paid him any attention in the last years or decades of my life, he is not angry at me. He is waiting with open arms for me to come to him, to say, let me help you deal with your anxiety. The Bible goes on to say that perfect love casts out fear. And I think that just means the more I realize that my Father in heaven loves for me, cares for me, he has counted the number of hairs on my head. He's still in charge. He's the same before the virus as he is after and during the virus. That makes a tremendous difference in my life. And I pray in this time that you can open your heart to this Father and that God will reveal himself to you. My prayer for you is that God grant you in this time peace. Thanks for watching this short video impulse from the Freie Christengemeinde in Linz. If you found it helpful, consider sharing it on social media with your friends and family.